This is Mac OS Ken.
A couple of takes on iPhone sales. The latest Apple Spotify row follows a predictable path, and Apple Vision Pro numbers look good to Jim Cramer. It is Friday, the 26th of April, 2024. I'm Ken Ray, and this is news from Mac OS Ken, brought to you by yours truly and sponsored by Pen Chalet, selling exquisite fountain pens for over 10 years with special offers for Mac OS Ken listeners at penchalet.com/macosken. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macosken. Props to Consumer Intelligence Research Partners, or CIRP, for making a name for themselves over the past few years. Their easy-to-understand charts and posts make them easy to repeat and share. We all know their name now, largely due to their easy-to-understand charts and posts. I'm not saying their information is incorrect. It's just worth noting that all of the stories yesterday about the decline in iPhone sales in the U.S., from Apple Insider to Mac Rumors to 9to5Mac to Seeking Alpha, they all came from one report from CIRP. While we have reason to believe iPhone's share of the installed smartphone base is higher, says the firm's most recent Apple release, they say the reality of sales market share is a more difficult situation for Apple. By the firm's reckoning, iPhone's share of smartphone activations in the U.S. has fallen from 40% in the 12 months ending with the March quarter of 2023 to 33% for the 12 months ending last quarter. That is based on CIRP's quarterly survey of mobile phone customers. The firm says tracking the full 12 months rather than performance of a given quarter eliminates seasonality caused by new phone launches, gift giving, and so on. Honestly, CIRP seems almost apologetic about the numbers it's giving, saying, as the prices of smartphones increased, happily their durability did too. The rapid escalation of features also slowed. The move from 2-year subsidized phone purchase contracts to more transparent phone purchase plans has motivated many smartphone owners to wait a little longer to upgrade from their current phone. That may be affecting Apple sales a bit more than their Android competitors. That's as close as CIRP comes to offering a reason for the numbers it's seeing. Where the firm lands now, post-pandemic smartphone activations in the U.S. have returned to the historic level of about 1/3 iPhone, 2/3 Android. Taking a look at smartphones in China, new numbers from IDC read like a bit more of the same. Not the same as CIRP, the same as numbers we heard earlier this week from Counterpoint Research. Counterpoint had iPhone in third place in the first quarter for the Chinese market, accounting for 15.7% of smartphone sales. Similarly, IDC has Apple in third place, kind of, with a 15.6% share of the smartphone market. I say kind of because IDC actually has Apple tied for third with Oppo, and it's 15.7%. I assume that's because data is preliminary and subject to change, as IDC points out. The two firms do differ wildly on a number of numbers. For example, while Counterpoint had iPhone sales down about 19% year-on-year, IDC says they were only down 6.6%. Additionally, while Counterpoint had Huawei right behind Apple in fourth place with a 15.5% share, IDC has it in first place, tied with Honor, the former with a subject to change 17.1% share and the latter with 17%. Both IDC and Counterpoint also see growth for China's smartphone market. Counterpoint had them up 1.5% year-on-year, while IDC sees a much more robust growth of 6.5%. As for what happened to iPhone sales, IDC says in the high-end segment, the AI buzz and the foldable products allowed the Android smartphone vendors to further differentiate themselves from Apple and garnered increased interest from Chinese consumers. Not that Apple didn't try. It just didn't succeed in IDC's estimation. The release quotes a senior research analyst in client system research for IDC China, saying that Apple's price promotions in the quarter were unable to mitigate the impact of the intense competition from Android players. Despite their differing numbers, something pointed out earlier this week by Counterpoint seems to be borne out in the IDC data. Counterpoint senior analyst Meng Zhang was quoted earlier this week saying, Q1 2024 was the most competitive quarter ever, with only 3 percentage points separating the top 6 players in terms of market share in China. While IDC's release does not comment on that, its chart shows the top 5 smartphone vendors in China separated by 2.5 percentage points. The Democratic Republic of Congo says Apple is using conflict minerals in its devices. 9to5Mac has lawyers for the DRC saying the company is sourcing tin, tungsten, and gold, called 3T minerals, from the country's eastern region in a trade involving violence, child labor, and other human rights violations. Implications in the press release are that Apple and other tech companies get their 3T minerals from Rwanda, but lawyers for the DRC say Rwanda's production of key 3T minerals is near zero. The argument seems to be that the minerals are actually coming from the DRC, with their extraction fueling a cycle of violence and conflict by financing militias and terrorist groups and contributing to forced child labor and environmental devastation. For its part, Apple's published conflict minerals report from December of last year had the company finding no connection between its smelters and refiner partners and the armed groups of the DRC. Lawyers for the country are asking Apple to address the concerns in the next 3 weeks. I really wish the Spotify thing had gone differently than I think we all knew it was going to go. I told you yesterday that Spotify had decided it really didn't like the hoops through which Apple has said developers have to jump to let would-be subscribers in the European Union know that they can subscribe outside of the App Store at potentially lower prices than subscribing in the App Store. Those hoops include having to pay a core technology fee to Apple for those outside purchases and having to use a special link, presumably so Apple still has a hand in the transaction. Instead of going by Apple's rules, Spotify submitted an app update that it said featured basic pricing and website information, data that the music streamer said was the bare minimum outlined by a recent music streaming ruling by the European Commission. I gotta say, I was wrong about Apple sitting on this submission. Less than 24 hours after Spotify submitted the update, a piece from 9to5Mac says Apple has rejected it. Yeah, remember those hoops and rules we were talking about mere moments ago? According to the report, Apple has shared with 9to5Mac that Spotify must use the European Economic Area Music Streaming Services entitlement to include calls to action to purchase outside the App Store. Of course, Spotify's cool with that, except for the cool part. According to 9to5Mac, Spotify is arguing since it didn't include a link in the latest update submission, it shouldn't have to get an entitlement and pay the commission, and it shouldn't be forced to use an entitlement and a link to communicate with consumers through in-app links. In a statement shared with 9to5Mac, the music streaming service said, Apple has once again defied the European Commission's decision, rejecting our update for attempting to communicate with customers about our price unless we pay Apple a new tax. Their disregard for consumers and developers is matched only by their disdain for the law. More news in a moment, but first a word from today's sponsor, Pen Chalet. selling exquisite pens for over 10 years. Have you picked out your pen yet from Pen Chalet? I've been focused a lot this week on the starter boxes at penchalet.com/MacOSKen for a couple of reasons. First, I helped put them together with Pen Chalet. The other reason, if I had had the right pen, paper, and ink combination years ago, I'd have been into fountain pens years earlier. Here's the thing, though. They're not magic. I mean, they are, but they're pens, meant to be picked up and used. If you see something on the Pen Chalet site besides the starter boxes, Pen Chalet's got a deal for you. Use code MOK10 to get 10% off when you buy something besides the starter box. Those are already packaged at a discount. One brand that always gets me is Conklin. Modeled on pens of the early 1900s, there's just something about their styling that does it for me. Maybe you go for more of a modern look, something like a Twisby or one of those Lammies. For yourself, for a family member, if you see something you like, take 10% off with code MOK10 at penchalet.com/MacOSKen. Or get started with a starter box, made just for MacOSKen listeners. It might sound weird to hear me say that fountain pens changed my life, but they did. It's one of the reasons I am so happy to tell you about Pen Chalet. See what they have for you at penchalet.com/MacOSKen. And a huge thanks to Pen Chalet for sponsoring today's show. Someone else has taken issue with TF International analyst Ming-Chi Kuo's most recent take on Apple Vision Pro. Earlier this week, the analyst posted to Medium saying Apple had cut its 2024 Vision Pro shipments to 400 to 450,000 units versus market consensus of 700 to 800,000 units or more. That prompted a number of headlines and stories saying Apple's special spatial computer was a failure. It also seemed to frustrate Upload VR. That site wondered where the 700 to 800,000 units number came from, especially with sites like the Financial Times, The Information, and The Elec, indicating that Sony can only produce enough micro OLED displays for maybe 500,000 Vision Pros this year. Mad Money's Jim Cramer doesn't necessarily disagree with Ming-Chi Kuo's call for 400 to 450,000 units in 2024. What he disagrees with is whether that's bad. It is not, in his estimation. A piece from CNBC writes up Cramer's thoughts on the issue, calling worry over the number a straw man. Cramer argues, if Apple can sell 400,000 units of a $3,500 product that is just now having software written for it, then I think they're doing great. And finally today, if you got a message from Apple that your iPhone upgrade program trade-in was canceled, good news, no it wasn't. According to a piece from Mac Rumors, Apple on Thursday sent an email to some iPhone upgrade program members to inform them that their previously completed iPhone trade-in had been canceled. Off the bat, the site figured that those emails were sent in error. That's because some of them were for iPhones that customers had physically handed in at Apple retail locations, while others were sent to the Cupertino company months ago. Still, had to be scary though, since the email indicated that program participants were still on the hook for the phone. Because you didn't trade in your iPhone, we are unable to complete your trade-in process, said the email. It went on to warn that the associated loan on that phone would resume. Oops. By late morning on the West Coast, early afternoon back east, Mac Rumors confirmed that the email was a mistake. Not long after, Apple sent a follow-up email to affected customers to disregard the previous email. Today on the checklist, brought to you by SecureMac, we are looking at the recent Change healthcare hack that may have exposed info on half of the people in the U.S. Half. Then, an iPhone scam that is notable for its simplicity and its brazenness. Don't try that at home. Try checklist number 373, brought to you by SecureMac. Find it today at securemac.com/checklist or wherever you get podcasts. macOS Ken, brought to you by me and sponsored by Pen Chalet, selling exquisite fountain pens for over 10 years with special offers for macOS Ken listeners at penchalet.com/macOSKen. This show is also supported by people like you, patrons through Patreon. Find out more and add your support at patreon.com/macOSKen. Advertising handled by Backbeat Media, online at backbeatmedia.com. You can reach me a couple of ways. Info at macosken.com or call 716-780-4080. Until next time, that is news from macOS Ken. I'm Ken Ray.
Ciao.